So if one thing I absolutely want to stress to others is the idea that you want to keep yourself mentally active by expanding your horizons. Oftentimes, it's really easy to fall into a pitfall trap of your own making and think, oh well, that's not for me, and keep carrying on. Even while knowing this, I fall into the same trap of doing the same sort of things and essentially perpetuating my own boredom sometimes. You become your own worst enemy in a way. But sometimes you do break out of your habits, and like my video checking out a beat 'em up and spot the difference game for the first time, I figured I'd dive even deeper with a rhythm game, namely Rift of the NecroDancer. And I'm grateful I took the plunge, as it's an incredibly unique and incredibly euphoric experience. I'll be documenting what it was like day to day in a week I took to understand this rhythm game, and hopefully that can serve to help anyone else who is unsure of trying something new that you're iffy about. Music truly is the first magic of this world, as Metaphor Refantazio mentions. But the thing was, I'm very much surprised of how easy actually it was to get into the thick of things without any prior experience, about 12 hours total across a week, or about a little more than an hour and a half per day. Now, I'm not saying that's enough to become a pro or anything like that, far from it, but the time required to understand what's going on, how you can personally extrapolate and improve, and overall having that feeling of, I get it now, or
I'm really feeling it,
is actually not so hard to reach even for such a genre that I would say is rather difficult and niche. The thing is, the only videos I see for this genre of games that are visible or get views are often people doing perfect maximum difficulty, and it might give the wrong impression, as if to say, hey, if you can't play this well or aren't gifted, then you shouldn't bother as it'll be too difficult. It certainly felt that way for me for the longest of time. Look, I don't know anything about music theory, never actually played a rhythm game or an instrument, and I wouldn't say that I'm great at fast or accurate inputs. But man, do I wish I played a rhythm game earlier. It's seriously one of my favorite new things to look forward to. So I wanted to note that specifically, it's about changing your mentality of course, but also the need to expose yourself to new things consistently, as you'll be surprised how effective that is for helping you learn something than simply putting in long hours. Picking up something new assuredly requires effort, but most importantly, time. And with that is the idea of how do you cope with the impression of a looming and seemingly insurmountable wall impeding your progress. So I think of the reasons why things don't click with people is that their first impressions often lead them astray. If they don't like something automatically or feel challenged by it initially in a way that's beyond their current capacity, then it appears that most people will likely give up and never return. I get it, however, given how many things are vying for your time, it's easy to pick up something that you're already familiar with or something that doesn't require much conscious effort, especially after a long day. So why Rift of the NecroDancer? Because it's a modern title and noted to be difficult even for those who are familiar with rhythm games, and it's because it's kind of been sitting in my library for a while, the dreaded backlog and all of that. So day one was about an hour and 40 minutes. By the way, my format was doing the base game with just the tracks by themselves first, before repeating it in story mode afterwards. Aside from the minigames and boss battles, it's the same content between both, so it's a great way to see if there are any immediate improvements. And afterwards, if I didn't feel challenged enough, I would boot up one of the random DLC tracks. Spoilers by the way, that didn't happen too often as the game was indeed challenging. So, chapter 1 with its 5 tracks. It took about 2 attempts per track and totaling about 37 minutes for the story mode with its repeats. So one of the things is the control scheme, as trying to get into this seemingly simple layout of controls was rather difficult for a variety of reasons. Foremost, the default layout of the keys is in parallel to each other as it defaults to the left, up, and right keys, or W, A, and D. I kept pressing the S or down key, which is all 3 lanes at once, as I subconsciously defaulted that 3 similar lanes must mean that the same should apply to the keyboard as well. I figured I would try this at first, and if I didn't like it, I'd simply change it afterwards. Turns out the format stuck with me as I got used to it, albeit with some struggling. Secondly, I played this game on my keyboard, and that automatically gave me issues. You see, I have one with Hall effect switches or a magnetic keyboard that uses motion sensors to register inputs. What this means is that the slightest amount of force will trigger the button. Key pressing is so sensitive basically that if I accidentally fudge near a key, or wave my hand on it with slightly too much force, then no input even when setting it at the longest travel distance. I'm talking like 4 millimeters of travel distance causing activation. I'd imagine pros would like this sort of keyboard for this genre of game, as the response time is really fast, as you don't have to ascertain a particular muscle memory and hold on to a state between the input lag between physical components, i.e. the keyboard switch rebounds, screen latency, and overall latency, and what's happening during the feedback software-wise. But it makes it so I really, and I mean really, have to be careful with the keys I hit. So intentionality to how and when I press matters a lot, as it means I must try to maintain composure, especially when things go wrong. Anyhow, one of the first things I've noticed is that hitting perfects are actually really hard to do. As I'm looking over this footage of my beginnings, sheesh, this is rather rough. I did notice, however, by the end of the session that I could use the relative movement speed to determine when it crosses about the middle of the line to hit a perfect. Sometimes. I'm guessing it helps to have a higher refresh rate for motion clarity, as I usually play games at 120Hz. Otherwise, it was hard to focus both on the music and what was happening on the screen at the same time. It was already overwhelming screen-wise, and I didn't have a knack for sight reading or scanning the musical notes in advance. I knew I should rely on the music, however, so I made a mental note to myself to groove with the music as to feel the beat. So you can absolutely sight read what is happening on the screen, as it's fairly slow, but if you were me back then, nope, not happening. Whenever the game threw a basic change or end to a pattern, that would assuredly mess me up as well. Most of the music here was under or around the low 100 beats per minute, which by all means is quite slow. Although it doesn't necessarily translate to how many things are thrown on the screen, it does give some indicator of the difficulty, but more so with the skull values to indicate a relative intensity. That last track was really rough, especially as I accidentally put it on easy mode without realizing it and still scored similarly. So, starting with a D, 2 Cs and 2 Ds, my score improved by the end after the story mode reattempts with my first B. Higher records for the 2 Cs, an improved D score, and nearly, but not quite, almost C score for the first attempt at medium for the last track. Not bad, I'd say, so I went over to try the DLC, namely the Shovel Knight ones, as I love that game and its music. Well, since the DLC tracks are likely designed after you presumably beat the game, or got far enough at least, it didn't go so well. One of the things about rhythm games, of course, is that you probably won't do so well on your first, or even first few attempts, as you've likely never seen what kind of patterns there are, and can't react accordingly. Knowing that, I wasn't deterred in the slightest. I knew I couldn't do it yet, so I'll come back later. Overall, one thing I've noticed psychologically is that the passage of time felt really long, as a 3 to 4 minutes track worth of activity felt like it was moving really slowly. Day 2 then, or day 3 technically, as I didn't have time that day, was chapter 2, and I clocked about a similar hour and 40 minutes as the first session. 4 of the tracks required repeating before even beating it this time, but track 4 gave me a bit more trouble in particular. And overall, the story mode repeat was shorter at 33 minutes approximately. Initially, I got 2 Cs and 3 Ds, but I got my first A here on the repeat, 3 Cs and a B. A nice improvement already. I immediately noticed that there were far more difficult inputs and interesting elements, as they clearly had to move past standard gimmicks with more simultaneous inputs now. There are more multiple presses or shifting tile effects such as the bats for the chart notes, and now you have things like the hold inputs for the worms, or take the fire elements on the floor that accelerate the monsters, zombies that move diagonally, and so on. Also, the lower BPM of the songs at first really messed me up, as it's teaching the importance of actually mentally being on beat and maintaining good judgment with the flow of the music. Overall, there's this sense there are definitely more interesting things happening between the different patterns with overlaps, or are altered nearing the ending or middle of the segments to keep you on your toes. I've also noticed that sometimes the music doesn't quite match what's going on the screen, as you can't only use the music to judge if a note will fall in place as a safety gap for normal mode, no doubt. It creates odd and deliberate pauses that often end my combos, as it feels very abrupt, especially for a first try context. I see that people online note that hard mode is definitely more closer to what's happening in the music, and therefore a more enjoyable experience in that respect. So, track 4, or Count Funkula, with its half beats were seriously messing me up. Here I am struggling sometimes to even get OKs for a single slow moving monster note, and here they are trying to get you to do more dexterous moves that require direct sequence. I'm still struggling with the general layout at this point, but it's a little bit better as the highest counts are perfects, about 3/4 greats, and a similar number of OKs to my first time playing the game. I'm still hitting that bottom key by accident thinking it's the center one though, and it especially shows up when I'm overwhelmed, as it's still my mental default. Unlike day 1 however, I found that there was a notable shift in increasing difficulty ramping up. At this point, I was beginning to understand why people like this genre of game so much, and why some people think that this game in particular is great at teaching you the basics. While I'm still struggling with basic mechanics with misinputting and couldn't really pull off the more complex sequences, it still is really fun. I love seeing the direct improvement in trying to chase it. I could feel myself being pushed to the limit for each session, though it wasn't exactly overwhelming yet. Finally, I tried out Friday Night Funkin's initial track. It was a disaster. Somehow, I cleared it, but the score wasn't great. Day 3 was slightly less than the other 2 days at an hour and 30 minutes. Instead of 5 tracks that made up the first 2 chapters, now there are 6. What followed was 2 Cs, 2 Ds, and a C. But I didn't actually finish up the last track even for the standard game mode. So in the same amount of time it took me to beat Chapter 1 or Chapter 2 in its story mode was only a little less than half of the progress made for Chapter 3. I think this is actually where you learn the most while feeling that sense of a wall impeding your progress if you're new like me, especially because it ramps up the difficulty much more now that feels more like the intended experience. Other than the first track being easy as it probably should be, this is where many attempts to finish one track starts rearing its head. More complications occurred as the game threw stuff like armadillos that required a sequence of beats with a space between or all 3 consecutively, or the skeleton heads that contained a set of skeletons or the same half beats with additional inputs, and the most cheekily placed delays to make sure you're paying attention. They also start putting the idea of having the hold worm input sometimes while the rest of the stuff is happening too, which gave me ideas about the potential of using 2 hands, as there's 2 sets of inputs in this game, as I was usually just using WASD. But something I was struggling the most with other than the hold inputs was the harpies. So one of the things about this game is the common complaint about visual clutter, which, now that I played it, I can understand where people are coming from when they say this game is more memorization than sight reading. So if you mess up around this point, it becomes really hard to decipher what to do once you've lost the sequence in the pattern. It then becomes difficult to get back on track from looking at it, as it's often combined with losing a lot more HP as you likely struggle to keep up to a point until you can get settled again, as it seems like a conjunction of pattern complexity combined with more beats on the screen. It wasn't too bad yet, as I felt if I tried again, I could probably get it eventually, sooner than later. What was notable to me as well was the points that indicated a chorus or bridge section that helped distinguish the charting or the overall flow of the track.
Is that all you've got?
So the second one took 12 minutes, 22 minutes for track 3, track 4 was somehow a first try, and track 5, Progenitor, was my first real wall. I only recorded 18 minutes of it, but when adding up the rest of the time, it took me about 30ish minutes to clear it, or the longest amount of time so far for one track. It starts to become a point in which if I can't keep up, then I likely won't pass the track at that point, as they have clear chorus sections or heavier input segments that will snowball real fast. Also, it clocks in about 4 minutes when most tracks are about the low 3-minute mark, so it has almost 20% more time for something to go wrong. I decided to attempt it without recording gameplay and it didn't go so well, but I came back to it after a short break afterwards and somehow I did it, albeit I didn't capture footage for it. I'm pretty sure that's a leitmotif at around 240ish, and that was extremely hype. At least I got a C after I was done. But one of the things I started noticing is that inkling that I was somehow autopiloting some sections without realizing it. I was basically in tune with what was happening at some rare instances, and although it didn't last long, it was very surreal to step into the state when my head has been fried by the next step in this curated sense of difficulty. If I wasn't pushed to the limit then, I most certainly felt it now, but somehow I got 3 Cs for the first clears of each track, which, in a way, that's probably the same as a D. As well, if you don't keep up to some degree, you'll likely lose than get a D scoring given how the game is taking some of the training wheels off by providing less healing items with the increased range of patterns. Still, it is progress by standard metrics. Day 4 is, well, only 50 minutes. I didn't realize what I was getting into with this track, as this one piece took the entire amount of time. Given how it was the last track in the set, I needed to beat Matriarch this day, no matter what, so I attempted to do so. To me, this was the most euphoric moment of playing the game. I felt like I was doing something right, in the process of learning to use the music as a tool to understand the chart really became notable, even if I wasn't really succeeding. I actually lost multiple times, hilariously enough, due to the end segment with the last few beats containing those damn waves of stupid birds stealing my last life point too in the last 6 or so beats, though it would have been completed a lot earlier in. I was so surprised I was able to beat it, honestly. It kind of reminds me of the process of playing Souls-like games actually, in which you get stuck at a certain boss. You do all that effort to get into a second phase, only to lose in the first few moments. So you have to repeat everything up to that point to get a chance now at doing that section again, and hopefully you can learn to discern enough from the encounters to pull it off now. The thing is, however, I wasn't exactly doing the other sections as well as I could, so it's still good practice overall until that point. But the overwhelming visuals here, and the need to respond moment by moment, is also similar to that feeling that you can't really afford to mess up, so definitely higher stakes than before. Yet, as I work through it, you get this overwhelming sense that victory is near at hand. It just needs a bit more effort. I could feel myself inching closer to victory each time, and I felt like I was in a trance-like state. I was able to pull off things in real time that I could not react to just a few moments prior. I could truly understand why people think this is so fun. Even though I got a C rank, I felt incredible after the session, as it was cool to witness some personal growth in real time. So the score tally was 2 Cs, 2 Ds, and 2 Cs in total. 4 Cs total for my first clears, not too bad. For day 5, I was initially unsure if I could even complete chapter 3 stages again in the same expedited manner as chapters 1 and 2, but apparently I did it. It took about 55 minutes for all the stages, which is a massive improvement compared to the 2 hours or so just to complete just the tracks by themselves. 4 Cs now and 2 Bs for the final 2, and ironically enough, the earlier stuff gave me a bit more trouble than the arguably harder stuff. It was great to see improvement for the tracks that gave me the most trouble, at only 4 tries for Progenitor and a single attempt for Matriarch. But here comes chapter 4 now, and it also has 6 tracks. C, D, 2 Cs, and well, that's it. And just like chapter 3, I became hard stuck at the 5th track yet again, and this by far was my longest wall overall. But yeah, for me, it seems like the time to get the first clear scales almost linearly longer. What is interesting as well is that most of the tracks here are actually on the shorter side, so it seems like most if not all of the training wheels are off by this point. It took 2 attempts for the first track, 1 for the second, 4 for track 3, and about 7 to 8 for track 4 or 24 minutes. For those 4, it only took about 50-ish minutes. Not too bad honestly given the increase in difficulty. But you wanna know how long that took for the session overall? 3 hours this day, as the rest was dedicated solely to track 5, Suzu's Quest. I could not clear track 5 however in the 2 hours it took to attempt it, and I wanted to explain why first. The game becomes incredibly difficult for me at this point, as I had some inkling about it earlier, but I noticed that most stages at the medium difficulty can be somewhat comfortably cleared with only one hand. Now the game kinda expects you to watch out for odd follow-up beats and sequences that will have you shift both hands more, and this really can't be done with simply just one hand at points. This was and still is difficult for me to mentally adapt to, as it basically turns the game from sometimes requiring 1 to 3 buttons to 4 to 6, as the alternative inputs are practically required for me in such moments. It's probably why Cadence's guitar is a 6-string one, but yeah. The game also expects you to react to way more sudden shifts and patterns too, which if you're focusing too intently solely on the music or the patterns, you might not notice some of the devious little tricks they put here and there. Anyhow, I felt completely defeated at this point and had some feelings that this was the end, and the limit to my capabilities, as I'm not cut out for this. I tried the trick of taking a slight break after trying it a few times at first, but got really stubborn as I got decently close a few times, to around the last 20 seconds or so, and felt like I could do it. Then, I tried it a little while afterwards for a similar session, but that time, I was literally 1 note off from winning due to this samurai enemy. I know some people really hate these guys, but I didn't have an issue with them. What I did have an issue is that I think that the game actually robbed me of a win. The track ends with 3 of these dudes for the triple input, but somehow the middle one got delayed. There wasn't the audio cue to indicate this, and it was supposed to be the all 3 input for sure. Things truly were hanging by a wire, and I was pulling through by the skin of my teeth, and arguably I did do it, but nope, didn't count. Extraordinarily aggravating. But you know what's the worst thing you can do in pretty much any learning process? Not taking breaks and thinking what you can do in the moment will suffice as you obstinately try to push through. At that point, I was feeling mental and physical fatigue at essentially playing at the fastest speeds I've tried so far for an extended period of time. I was slowing down significantly at points at which I was easily or at least handily clearing previously. I learned how to strategically give up on the game for another day, but I absolutely wanted to get back to it as soon as possible. And so the next day arrived with day 6, and I was somewhat conflicted whether my time and effort would have translated to a win. So with that in mind, I simply went in with my best foot forward, and what do you know, 4 minutes and 20-ish seconds to clear it after failing to do it the day prior for 2 hours. The body also needs time to process things too, as people may say, tough boss, don't worry about it and come back to it another time, it'll be easy. Same applies here. If you can't trust yourself, never doubt the effort you put in is what I'm saying, I guess. I got a C here, and it would have been a B I think if the game didn't bug out in yesterday's section, but I'll take it. The next track that ends this collection is Necropolis, and I was scared with how long it took for Suzu's Quest that I was heading for a 2-hour repeat session for one track again. But no, actually, somehow I got a B there on my second attempt in, and with both tracks only totaling 11 minutes or so. The totals then are C, D, 3 Cs, and a B. But I wasn't stopping here today as I wanted to clear the story mode for chapter 4 as well. It took an hour and 15 minutes, and that's pretty great in my opinion considering all the struggling the day before. I was having more issues again with the prior tracks than the problematic ones, as Suzu's Quest and Necropolis only took one attempt each afterwards. The final scores afterwards were 5 Cs, with the second D changing to a C, and the third and fourth Cs being score improvements with that B at the end. The other ones were similar to what I scored previously, which is not bad at all as I just crossed and recrossed what I think was the biggest wall so far in roughly an hour and 10 minutes overall. However, I didn't know what to think of for the final chapter. I was thinking it was going to pick up even more than the previous day. Well, for the last day of the week, I was absolutely determined to finish the base game as it would be a neat way to wrap it up. I figured that with each chapter being significantly harder than the last, this was going to be the explosive finish to the game. And well, it kinda was, but it's only 2 tracks. So the intentionality of this chapter feels more to me that if you took everything to heart from all the previous tracks, then you'd have no problem clearing it, as that's exactly what happened. It only took me 15 minutes to clear 2 tracks. Sure, it was only a D and a C scoring, but it took me 1 and 4 attempts respectively. For the story mode, it took 20 minutes, but if you don't count the cinematics and stuff like that, then it would only be 13 minutes or so including the boss battle. I turned the D score into C2, so 2 Cs. Seeing how it only took about 35 minutes to clear the game, I decided to do the Crypt of the NecroDancer tracks with a B, 2 Ds, and 2 Cs for my first try. Not too bad for tracks on the first time honestly in 16 minutes. Only one track took me a retry or 2. Afterwards, I went back to the Shovel Knight tracks and redid the first track and the very last one, an underlying problem, my absolute favorite from the game. 2 Cs on the first try. It seems to be now that slower tempos are my nemesis as I'd lose the combo because I figured there'd be a beat there when there wasn't, or misinput the timing. Gotta work on the slower BPM stuff. Something definitely changed about my mentality and ability to feel the notes however, as I don't even recognize the earlier gameplay being mine anymore. So I thought Shovel Knight was basically impossible when attempting on day 1, and not only could I do it comfortably, but I could easily and massively improve if I wanted to. I picked up some finger dexterity too that actually helped me with typing, as I mentioned before with a Hall Effect Switch keyboard. It was really easy to miss input keys often, as they're primarily used for low latency for gaming compared to a good typing experience. Still do miss input of course. For reference, I had a brown switch mechanical keyboard prior, which was really great at typing due to its tactile feedback when pressing down the switch. I was reaching somewhere between 65 to 70 words per minute typing speeds on that thing. This newer one not so much, perhaps 40-45ish at best. Anyhow, I can kind of feel the expression and improvisation of knowing somehow, with how the music structure is like, I can implicitly and almost reflexively run my fingers to relate back to what is required sometimes without realizing it. I think I got a hang of it in a way, although much practice is required. I was noticing the smallest inkling of this perhaps at day 4 or so, but it feels like something I can almost utilize. It was so spontaneous yet so natural at the same time. I love being in a flow state, so finally I went back to the worst scores I got from day 1 with those tracks and redid the 4th and 5th ones, or the only tracks of the base game which I did not score above a D rating. And what do you know, double B ratings, with the last one almost being an A, and as it felt like a breeze. Too slow even. So it started somewhere around the 110 to 120k placement to down around 42k in the scoreboard, so not bad overall. Yeah, I know that's not exactly correct given it's a per track basis, but it's nice to know how many paces you are improving at relative to others. Though, I will say that the amount of people who likely gave up prior will likely make it so naturally. I will send the scoreboard as long as I made the effort to actually get there to the end, but I think it's still cool to see. But yeah, now I'm thinking about spaces and timing between my fingers reaching and pressing and how to make it more uniform. Purposely only using my other hand to make simultaneous inputs more easier, and how to optimize where I'm looking at points to sight read better if possible. I think I'm at a point in which I can extrapolate off what I know and hit hard mode in the not so distant future as well. Impossible actually is impossible for most from the looks of it. I've seen gameplay of it and well, I'm not sure if I want to go there honestly due to how much effort it would take to get to that point. But hard mode seems very realistic once I refine myself a bunch more on medium. But this only took about 1 to 2 hour gameplay sessions stretched across a week. If anything, a bit shorter and consistent sessions would likely still work. It depends I suppose on what it takes for your brain to become saturated with the mechanics of the game. In any case, the whole point I suppose of this video is to show you how easy it is to get into something that you're iffy about. Don't let your reservation be your preservation, or something. It was incredibly rewarding to put myself into an experience like this, and I'm looking forward to more. You know, one of the most interesting things I've come across is that people who are really high up in technical fields surprisingly don't just confine themselves to slavishly pursuing one field or interest. They often do many other things, and that's probably how it channels their well of creativity and interest to keep doing what they do. I hope that this video inspires you to take on a new challenge in some fashion, even if it's just something adjacent to your hobbies or beyond it. Thanks for watching, I hope you will subscribe. Let me know what you thought, and I'd be happy to know if you had some recommendations for rhythm games. I kinda wish I got the Persona dancing games, but perhaps another time.